Good morning, Standards 5. Today I have a prose lesson, and the title is Cuss Interviews the Stranger. Now, this lesson is very interesting. It's a mystery story and it is taken from a science fiction novel called The Invisible Man. Now, this lesson was written by the author H.G. Wells. He is actually called as the father of science fiction, and you will find that this story, The Invisible Man, is related to science. The story begins about a man called Griffin, who is actually a scientist. He starts studying medicine, and as he is studying medicine, he happens to come upon a chemical or a formula that tells us how tissues can be made invisible. And so he decides that instead of studying medicine, he decides to switch on to physics. So what he does is he robs money from his father's treasury and decides to find a formula in which he could become invisible. And once he finds out the chemical that makes his tissues invisible, he robs a bank, he burns his owner's house, he does a number of things and is not caught. But then he decides that he would come and he would use this invisible chemical or the invisible formula to frighten the people of England. So he decided to come to a place called Iping in England. In this village, Iping in England, he comes and stays at a hotel, and the name of the hotel is Coach and Horses Inn. There he pays a lot of money to a husband and wife called Mrs. Hall. And because of the money, that lady doesn't ask any questions to him, and she gives him a room in the hotel. He then covers himself with bandages throughout his body. He covers himself because inside his body he has used the chemical and made his tissue invisible. He covers himself with bandage and puts a false pink nose in the front. And then he goes to the room and starts behaving in an awkward way. When you say awkward way, it tells us that he never spoke to anyone in the village. When people tried to speak to him, he never responded to them. So people started spreading news that he must be a criminal and he must be somebody the police is searching for, and just to hide himself from the police, he has covered himself with bandages and he is escaping from the police. So one day, one man who is a doctor, his name is Dr. Cuss, he decides that he would go and meet this bandaged man, Mr. Griffin. Mr. Cuss goes to meet this invisible man, Mr. Griffin, in his room, and very soon you will find that this Dr. Cuss leaves the place hurriedly and goes and meets the vicar of the village. When you say vicar, it is some leader of the village, a deputy leader of the village. This doctor runs hurriedly to meet the vicar of the village. The name of the vicar of the village was Mr. Bunting. When Cuss went to meet the vicar, that is Mr. Bunting, he tells his experience that he had with the invisible man in the hotel. And what was the experience? He tells them that when he went in to talk to the invisible man, that man was reading a paper or a prescription. And suddenly, air blew and the paper flew. The prescription that invisible man was reading flew up into the air and fell into a fireplace, and the fire that was there got this paper burnt into ashes. But then, when this man went to pick the paper, Mr. Cuss happened to see that he could only see a sleeve and there was no hand inside the sleeve. It was totally transparent, and he says that there was a hole in the sleeve, and through that he could see through the hole in the sleeve, that there wasn't any hand present, only a sleeve was moving. And this is what made Dr. Cuss frightened. When Dr. Cuss asked him about the empty sleeve or the invisible hand, as soon as Dr. Cuss asked him about the invisible hand, he began to realize that his secret is being let out. So he stood up, came close to Dr. Cuss, and lifted up the same hand and took that and went and pinched Dr. Cuss's nose. He nipped Dr. Cuss's nose. Dr. Cuss reacted immediately. He just took his hand and hit that empty or invisible hand. And what he felt was, he felt that he was hitting a real hand that was hard with flesh, but you couldn't see anything. You couldn't see the hand, only an empty sleeve moving around. This made Dr. Cuss to immediately leave the room, and that is why he has come to the vicar to tell him his experience with the invisible man. In spite of Dr. Cuss trying to convince Mr. Bunting, Mr. Bunting was just laughing it away and saying, "You must have been frightened, or you must have mistaken things because you were afraid." All these things he said and made fun of him, but never trusted the doctor. And the story ends by saying that, Mr. Bunting tells the Dr. Cuss, "That was a wonderful story you told us, but really this is something that Dr. Cuss experienced. Have you ever seen Harry Potter? In that, even you find Harry Potter getting invisible by putting a robe on himself. The same experience Dr. Cuss has with the invisible man here." Thank you.